Welcome to the woods. Welcome to the cabin. The weather can't seem to make up its mind today. It was pouring down with rain, then it was blue skies and sunshine, then it snowed, then it hailed. Now it's sunny again, but to be on the safe side, I'm going to do this one inside. What a week so far. So earlier this week we had the situation in Canada, which went from being something I was quite optimistic about, the Freedom Convoy, Trudeau running away with his tail between his legs, to something I've tried to discuss with quite a few people, which is the implementation of a dictatorship in Canada, which is what we've had, where the system of liberal democracy has been scrapped to all intents and purposes, and an authoritarian dictatorship has been put in its place. The protesters, the Freedom Convoy, has been utterly crushed. The leaders rounded up and thrown in prison. Bank accounts have been frozen, not only for those people who protested, but for those that offered assistance. Private property has been confiscated. The public have been beaten. And now news is coming in of deaths for both the protesters and some of the leaders. New legislation has been put in place by the Prime Minister, Trudeau, that means that this sort of behaviour can happen at any point should anybody wish to protest about anything unless the government sanction it. So you can only protest now if the government tell you it's okay. If they agree with what you're protesting for, then go ahead. If they don't agree with you, you can have your personal belongings confiscated, your bank account frozen, and you can be thrown in prison. That's a dictatorship. And yet, when I've tried to speak to people about this, 80% have no idea what I'm talking about, because it hasn't been in the mainstream media. It hasn't been on the front page of the newspapers or in the magazines. It hasn't been on TV. This isn't something they've informed the public about. There's been silence. It's been ignored. And all of this has gone on for what? For a virus that no longer exists. In order to get people vaccinated for something that was never worth being vaccinated for in the first place. In order that they could have that digital ID. And no matter what, it seems, some governments are pushing forward with that agenda. And there is nothing you can do to stop it. you would think that there would be a mass exodus from a country that acted in that manner. And maybe there would be, except if you haven't been vaccinated, you cannot leave the country. There's people stuck in Canada that don't even live there. I heard the story the other day of a young Russian woman who wants to return home, but can't because she hasn't been vaccinated and therefore can't get on a train and can't get on a plane, so she can't return home. To all intents and purposes, a prisoner in another country. And all so that the population can get a digital ID. It really does seem to be quite important. And for those of us looking at it, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Whereas in the UK, all restrictions have been rolled back and things are fairly normal. And I understand they're like that in some European countries as well. Whereas in others, it's the exact opposite. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Italy, Austria. These places doubling down and going even harder. More lockdowns, more legislation. So it seems that what was once in lockstep has now changed. It seems that some countries are going at a slower rate or taking a different route. But as you look around, you can see that the end result is probably going to be the same. The restrictions for COVID here have been rolled back, but the infrastructure for a digital ID is already in place. So it looks as if the governments have been given an end goal to reach in the best way they can see for their country. And here it's a slower approach, maybe taking a different route, but the end result's going to be the same. Only this week, the World Health Organization unveiled its new plans for a global digital ID being built by a German telecoms company. This digital ID, like it or not, faster or later, is going to be implemented, or so it would seem. And yet so many people don't even know about it, because it's not on the TV and it's not in the papers. So what is on the TV and in the papers this week? Well, I'm sure we all know that war is upon us once again. Europe is about to be plunged into yet another catastrophe. And I'm not a political analyst, and I'm far from a historian when it comes to Russia. So I'm going to take a broad view of what's happening and kind of tie this back to what's happened in Canada and what's happened everywhere globally over the last 2 years. Because the situation in Russia and Ukraine and the response from Europe and America is going to have consequences. And there's going to be a lot of argument over the next months on who is right and who is wrong. I'm not going to get into that. But what are the consequences going to be? Well, so far, America and NATO, Britain, Germany, have said to Russia that if they invade, which they have, there will be harsh and strict sanctions, both financial and commodity-based, trade. So these sanctions are going to be in place. And Russia is going to reciprocate by doing much the same. So what is Russia going to cut off to Europe? Gas, which we could all see coming, and food. And not just from Russia, but from Ukraine as well. Vast amounts of grain, vast amounts of crops. And what does that lead to? Well, that's going to lead to something we've discussed over the last year of what's going to be coming down the road. This is going to lead to food shortages and an energy crisis. And I'm not even touching on the financial implications here. And I'm not talking about the financial implications to you and me insofar as your gas bill that's already doubled may double again. And the food you're buying will increase dramatically when there is not very much of it. But the financial implications of, let's say, Russia aligning with China and stopping to use the US dollar, but using their own currency, which will probably be digital. Both of these nations have tried out their own digital currencies, which would no longer put America at the top of the financial food chain, something that ties in again to the Great Reset, the food shortages tying into the Great Reset, and the fuel crisis, of course, tying into the Great Reset, because it will give the impetus for a huge push towards sustainable, green energy. And it's a way of getting the public, who will be financially crippled by energy costs, and that will be blamed on the Ukrainian-Russia crisis, to get on board with these new ideas, these new greener energies. The electrification of everything. Your vehicle will be electric. You won't have a gas central heating system, a boiler. That will have to be junked for a ground source heat pump, which sounds fantastic until you realise it runs on electricity. Everything will be electric. But that will have to be rationed in the long run, because there won't be enough of that to power everything. But you can see that even this crisis between Russia and the Ukraine leads directly into the Great Reset. The fuel crisis that will be approaching, the food crisis that will be approaching, the energy crisis as well, plays directly into what they want. So on the one hand, we've got Canada, that no one knows about because it's not been televised, that switched to a dictatorship where the dictator now goes on telly decrying other dictatorships. And front page news of a war designed to terrify the general public and give a reason for a hike in prices, until the solution can be found, coming from the WEF yet again. Keep your eyes open. Start to talk to people, start to point out where this is all coming from and why it's happening. It's quite a difficult situation to see our way through. It seems so large, kind of overpowering. As individuals, we don't have much say in what goes on, and much power to change things. But we do have the power to learn and the power to change our own lives. And just recently, with the storms we've had in the UK, something cropped up. Something was brought sharply into focus. Several friends of mine had power cuts. Something I can see that's going to be happening much more frequently. And during those power cuts, everything stopped. So for a period of over 24 hours, when they had no power, they couldn't cook. They couldn't heat their homes. Their phones went dead. They had no idea what they were doing the following day because all of their contacts, all of their reminders, all of their diary were on their phone. They've become very used to having that smartphone. And without it, they didn't have a clue what was going on. They couldn't contact anyone. The landline is a thing of the past. And I thought that maybe, probably next week, I'm going to do a video. I've done stuff on how to go off grid. But there are things you can do now to ensure that when these things happen, you're in a much better situation. For the sake of a £100 generator, you've got power. You can power your phone, you can power your computer, you can power lights. So you would have light. There's other things you could purchase, and I'm going to do a video on probably spending £500 on different items that will take up very little room, that will get you through a period when there's no power. And I'm going to do that next week. So although the overarching situation at the moment from every quarter seems rather negative, there are things we can do to ensure that we get through it. Anyway, you lot, I've got another roof to put on a shed. It didn't blow off during the storm, but it blew off the day after. I'll speak to you soon. Take it easy.